G'day and welcome to this episode. Great to have you along. Our guest this month is author and consultant, manager and founding director Ros Cardinal. But before we meet Ros, let's go back to the year 1989 when she turned 21. Nintendo's Game Boy launches in Japan in April, selling 300,000 units in 2 weeks and reaching 720,000 consoles and 1.9 million games sold by August. Not a bad effort at all. In the US, backed by a $51 million, that's 2024's equivalent, $50 million marketing push, it sold 40,000 units. 40,000 units on day one and hit 1 million within weeks, cementing its status as a blockbuster launch. Closer to home here in Australia, the Hawke government ends free university education, which had been introduced in the Whitlam years in 1974 with the introduction of the Higher Education Contribution Scheme, or HECS, those of us who had to pay it in 1989. While the interest rates on home mortgages reached 17%. On December 28th in this year, a magnitude 5.6 earthquake hits Newcastle in New South Wales, killing 13 people. On TV, Young Talent Time is cancelled before the new series goes to air. Fast Forward premieres. Remember Fast Forward? That was a great show. While Neighbours introduces a new look theme song. Theme is sung by Barry Crockett. It's probably the classic Neighbours theme song we all reflect on, and it lasts until the end of 1994. And talking of Channel 10, Bob Shanks takes over as managing director of the network due to ailing ratings and totally revamps the network, giving it the name 10 TV Australia, as well as introducing a new lineup with increased game shows content, most of which the new shows were axed by the end of the year. Valet, Family Double Dare. We're watching TV shows in Australia such as Police Rescue, GP, E Street, that's Saxophone E Street, 30-something from the States, The Wonder Years, and Full House, the original, and listening to Tucker's Daughters and Moss. Love that song. If I Could, 1927, another classic, and another classic there I've written down, Change the Wheels, Black Sorrows. I'm sure I've got those on my Spotify playlist to annoy the kids in the car. In sport, Australia regains the Ashes on English soil for the first time in 40 years. I remember it well, defeating England 4-0 in the 6-test series. A good 6-test series, never hurt anyone against the Poms. And American Greg LeMond wins the Tour de France for the second time. And one-handed pitcher Jim Abbott. Now, this is a guy I came across when I was researching. Go read about Jim Abbott. Fascinating guy. Jim Abbott makes his Major League Baseball debut with the Californian Angels without spending a single day in the minor league. Go Google him. Fascinating life. It is the year 1989 when our guest Ros Cardinal turned 21. Big year for you when you turned 21. 21? What was your year like that year?
Not great, to be honest. I was actually pregnant with my first, and I was really sick. I had that horrible all-day sickness that some women have to put up with, and so I spent most of it really ill, and I think I blocked it all out of my memory. And then my son was born in June, so the rest of that year was taken up with sleepless nights and screaming babies and things. So I think I blocked it out of my memory.
Right. And did you ever say to him, you were a really great baby that year when I turned 21?
Oh, absolutely. He knows that. We whipped it out for me on his 21st birthday and talked about how sick he made me and the fact that I didn't have a 21st birthday party because I was too ill.
Right. Fair enough. So let's have a chat about you, and we might move on from the 21st. I think we'll just say as noted and move on. Wow. That would have been a really interesting experience, I guess. So you started out working at the Public Service Board, and then you worked through a number of departments, with the ACO being your last public service role before you moved into state. But I read somewhere that you wanted to become a vet, and before we were chatting formally, we were just talking about animal behaviour, and you did some work up at Taronga Zoo. So let's do the Ros, back in time. Where did you grow up? What was it all like? And then how did you end up doing what you did, going through the public service and then into your senior management roles and now having your own firm? Because it's a really fascinating journey.
And a lot of it was kind of accidental, to be honest. I mean, going back to the vet thing, that was, as a kid, I always wanted to be a vet. I was horse mad, had horses from the time I was about 12. I did a internship, one of those school holiday internships when I was at college with a vet. And, I was absolutely determined that's what I was going to do. And when I went and sat my I think it was called the ASAT test back in those days, and I missed vet science by about 1 point, which was just, devastating. One of those things where I kind of went, if I just studied that little tiny bit harder, I would have made it.
One more mark.
One more mark. So I missed out. It was really competitive. I think at that stage it was harder to get into vet science than it was to get into medicine. So,
wow.
So yeah, missed out on that. So I went and did science at the ANU as my sort of backup, I suppose, when I couldn't do vet science. But it kind of knocked me about for a bit. It was that thing of that was what I really wanted to do and I couldn't.
Right.
So moved into science. And then the accidental bit of the career was, as every good Canberra teenager did, when you finished college, they put you on, everyone got on a bus and they bussed you off to a testing centre and you all sat the public service exam. You just did it.
How very Canberra.
Nobody questioned it. You just did it. Here's the bus.
Dixon College down to the public service board or wherever it was.
Exactly, yeah. And so we did that, went off to, and I didn't think much of it, did the test, because at that stage, I was sort of pretty determined I was going to be a vet and didn't need that. And started work at the ANU. So I started my degree, but also needed to get a job. So I started working at the Research School of Biological Sciences doing, interesting enough, genetic engineering, which was really interesting.
That would have been quite early on in the time, wouldn't it?
Yeah, very early on.
The mid-'80s, so it's not like it's...
Yeah, so we were doing experiments with fruit fly and with, mice and things like that. It's very, very interesting. But one of the things about science is that everything's dependent on grant money. So every year there's a new round of grants. And so it's not a stable employment. Like they basically can only offer you a year at a time. And so I was sort of in this state of getting close to the end of the year. We didn't know if we had grant money. And I got a phone call saying, we're offering you a job in the public service because you got to the top of the list. Here's your job. And so I sort of went, well, stable career, why would I not do that? And it was back in the day, when you could start in the public service and then finish at age 65 with your gold watch kind of thing. So, everyone I spoke to said you'd be crazy not to take that up, so I did. Yeah. And that was a sort of accidental into the public service thing. And pretty much as soon as I arrived, the big restructuring of that late 1980s, early 90s started. And so that's why I moved so much, because we just kept getting restructured. And I remember the Public Service Board, it was, we were all brand new. We'd been there a few months and we were going through rotations where we sort of worked around all the different areas to learn about the different types of jobs. And they gathered us all into a meeting room and basically said, so we're restructuring and none of you have got jobs anymore. So here's the Government Gazette. Good luck,
Wow.
So it was a bit like that back in those days. So yeah, a lot of moves because of that, because I started to think it was me, because everywhere I went, I'd last about 3 months and there'd be a restructure.
But this is in the last throes of the Hawke Keating era, wasn't it, really? Or hang on, mid-'80s, so what was that? Definitely Hawke years?
Late 80s, yeah.
Yeah.
And it was
lots of changes as they were merging and amalgamating different departments and going through a lot of change.
Yes, that's how it sort of ended up that way. So like I said, that early part of my career was very accidental, because it was just, you just went where there was a job. I spent a lot of time with the Government Gazette on my desk sort of looking for jobs and applying for everything that came up,
And for those that don't know what the Government Gazette was, it came out, every week or every fortnight?
Every week, I think it was, paper,
Yep, and it had, here I am doing how big I get, half an A4, so A3 size, I guess, wasn't it? And it had all the jobs in every government department around the country, federal government department, and then all the promotions at the back, so you could see who got promoted to what.
And also who left. So there's all the resignations and things like that as well.
Yes. So it was almost seek before seek was seek, so to speak, in terms of the government jobs. So then how did you end up, so your last role with the public service was the ATO, is that right?
Yes.
Right. Okay, wow. And then you decided, so you're in Canberra. How did you end up in Hobart? Lovely part of the world, by the way.
Yeah, well, my first husband was Tasmanian, and I met him and married him in Canberra. Right. And it was, I can't remember what year it was, about 95, I think, 96, when he decided he'd like to sort of move back to Tassie, and we'd done a couple of trips down here and, liked it. So it was kind of like, up sticks and moved down here.
Sure. You've gone from one, and I say that respectfully to Tasmania, beautiful part of the world. Cold in Canberra, different cold, beautiful, beautiful part of the world in Hobart. So then you moved into a senior management role at an energy company, and then you established your own firm. So let's just deep dive into that a bit. What was that like? And then what was the moment that you decided, right, I'm going to go out on my own?
So that was, cycled through a couple of things. When we first moved down here, I did a bit of temp work for a couple of the government departments down here, and then moved into what was, it was a hydro back then. So there still is a hydro, but effectively started at the hydro, and then it got disaggregated into 3 companies, and I went with the retail arm of the business. So I ended up in a company called Aurora Energy, which was the retail side of the electricity business, and worked my way up over the 15 years I was there into the senior role, so as the organisational development manager. And I guess what prompted the change for me is in 2010 I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So had a pretty significant health issue, which really makes you reflect on what's important in life. It really does set you back. It's one of those things where up to that point, you think you've got plenty of time to do everything. You know, I was early 40s, very early 40s. I was, I think, 42, and it was that sort of sense of got plenty of time to do all the things I want to do, no great rush, career's going great, family's great, everything's lovely, that kind of thing.
Fantastic.
And and then all of a sudden you get this diagnosis, which makes you really go, what if this is it? All the things that I wished I'd done that I hadn't gotten around to yet. And it created this real sense of urgency around it. Once, I'd sort of worked through part of the treatment and realised that it wasn't a terminal diagnosis, that it was something that I could get through. And I had 6 months of treatment where you don't get to do much other than just sit around and try and recover, because radiation treatment really zaps your energy. It's, you get to the point where you can just get out of bed and hobble to the couch and lie down. And so I had plenty of time to think about it. And I really, I just got this sense I wanted to be doing something different, but I didn't know what it was at that stage. It was just I had this sense that I wanted to do something different with my life.
Right.
And so it took me a couple of years to figure it out. And then, the rest is history.
Right. So you've gone from being very sick. You're almost alone with your thoughts. I'm trying to presuppose what would have been like. I've not been sick, not had cancer, but, you're in bed almost mulling over the what ifs, or what could I do? Or I guess you get to know yourself pretty well when you're in that environment where you're alone with your thoughts a lot of the time. Is that a fair observation without trying to, be too challenging about the horrible experience you went through? And was it more of a experience over time where you thought, okay, this is some ideas and they were refined, or did you kind of wake up one morning and go, right, that's what I'm going to do?
No, it was very much the sort of slow build. So I did have this sense that I wanted to do more with my career. And so that was a thought that I had right at the beginning. There's a lot of other personal things around wanting to travel and all the other things. And we started doing that. As soon as I was better, we basically started traveling, going on international trips every year, which was great. Because before then, we'd always had, it's not the right timing. The kids are at the wrong stage of life. They're, a critical part of school, or there's something else going on. We don't have enough money.
There's always a reason why not.
Oh, exactly. And then when we sort of figured out, life's too short, it was getting into things like that. So, quite a few life changes around that. And the career thing just kind of built up. It was this sense of I really want to do something different. I sort of couldn't really see a clear career path for me where I was, because just where we were, the company was heading towards a reaggregation. So we disagged back in 1998, and then looked at reaggregating. So it's basically splitting the business up again and reaggregating to form different companies. And so the work that I was doing as well got put on the back burner, because organisational development is very much nice to have, leadership development, employee engagement, culture, all the really critical things. But when push comes to shove, the business goes, we can't really afford to spend money on that. So
unfortunately,
I could see the writing on the wall.
Right. So what was day one like? You set up your own shop, you registered the business name. Tell us about that.
Look, it was because I ended up letting my boss know that I was interested in leaving, and I talked to him about redundancy, because we knew we were heading for this merger and jobs would have to go. And so I negotiated a redundancy for my role, but I had to work my 6 months notice period. So I had 6 months to basically get all my ducks in a row.
Right. Okay.
And one of the things that happens when people know you're leaving is they stop involving you in things. So I stopped getting invited to meetings. People were like, there's no point you starting this project because you're leaving. I know. So I ended up I did a lot of practiced a lot of coaching in that time. I spent a lot of time supporting other managers and practicing my coaching, refining my skills. So I did a lot of really valuable work, but it just, in terms of the big stuff, wasn't there. And so when I left, I actually walked out of the business and the next day straight into doing some consulting work. So that actually worked really well.
So it was a nice runway, really, from one to another, transition, really.
Yeah.
So to come to what you do these days, why do people? This is a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because it's so obvious. But yet, I don't think a lot of people actually ask the questions. Why do people need leadership coaches, and why do so many people get it wrong? Which is, I guess, what you're trying to make people be better leaders, but why do they need them?
Leadership is one of those things that for most people who get a management role, they've not had any training in it. They've got their job because they're the best at what they do, like they're the best technician or the best engineer or the best accountant or whatever.
Yeah.
And so they've got all this years and years of training in their profession, but there's no management training per se. And then they move across and we expect them to have all these skills that we've never trained them to have, like how to have a difficult conversation, how to hold space for people, how to be a really effective listener, how to support people. And they just don't have it. So there's a number of aspects to leadership coaching. It's very, very broad. So I do get the people who come to me who are struggling in management and they get sent along because they need to build their skills. But I also get people who are really high performers who want almost like a confidential space where they can talk about things that they can't talk to somebody at work about. So, for example, I worked with a CEO a little while ago who was thinking about restructuring his executive team. And obviously he can't tell them that. And so he's got no one to talk to. So he and I did a lot of whiteboarding, around what that restructure would look like. I also get people who come for really specific things. Like I had a woman just recently who was applying for her first CEO role and she wanted, specific work around refining her application, getting ready for interview. And then when she won the job, we moved into making that change. It's stepping from a manager to a CEO role is a different level again. So for her, it was about really framing it up so she could hit the ground running as a CEO. Right. So there's a lot of different
mindset
things.
Too. I guess we'll come to that in a moment. Okay. So that's why people need leadership coaching. Why does you can go to any airport bookshop in the world, I guess, and there's dozens of self-help books and leadership books. Why do people get it wrong? How long do we have, she says.
Yeah, how long do we have? A lot of it is about the underpinning skills that make a really good leader. So it's things that we don't teach people in general. So emotional intelligence is a really big part of it.
Yeah.
Managing your own emotions, managing the emotions of others. There's a lot of skills in leadership, like political intelligence is another one, like understanding how politics work inside a business and being able to navigate and influence effectively. And we just don't teach those things to anybody. It's not a leadership thing. It's nobody gets taught that.
Yeah.
And so
almost like financial literacy. The kids don't necessarily get taught at school. We expect them to pop out as a full-rounded adult and then know how to budget and understand money. And
exactly. Same thing. And so most people who step into, there are people who are naturally very good at this and they step into it and it's their happy place and they fly. But for most people, their leadership and management roles can be quite uncomfortable experiences because they're having to do things they've never done before with skills they don't have.
Without a support network around them. Okay. And so a lot of that in the work that you do come to people understanding themselves. So how do you sit down with someone who's, without being rude, completely clueless and thinks they're really good, or someone who might come into you and go, I've got imposter syndrome? I read about that a lot on LinkedIn or, hearing about other people that, I'm sure we've all suffered that from time to time. You walk into a job and you go, I really should not be.
Yeah.
So let's look at both of those questions. How do you deal with people who might not have a lot of confidence? And then how do you deal with people who have got an overabundance of confidence that perhaps doesn't necessarily fit the role that they're meant to be doing?
So the imposter syndrome one is really, really common. I have lots of high-performing people come to me with I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I shouldn't be in the room. And incredibly talented people who just feel like they're not performing. And there's an element of nurture and an element of nature in that. So the nature part of it is people, are prone to a certain personality type who tend to be more that way. But the nurture part of it is people who've been rewarded and expected as children to perform academically, as an example. So they feel like their value and their worth is attached to how good they are academically. And then they bring that into their work life, which is if I'm not performing at 150%, if I'm not getting straight A's, in the corporate world, then I'm not good enough. And so they're spending their whole time aspiring to get that, straight A's. And if they feel like they're not, and their standards are incredibly high, so their idea of me failing is actually somebody else's acing it. And they constantly feel like they're not good enough and they're failing at something. So we have to unpack that. When I'm coaching people, we sort of work through all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
On the other side, the overconfident people, I do get those. They tend to get sent to me for coaching as opposed to wanting to come themselves.
Right.
So they turn up
necessarily. Yeah. Okay.
I think I'm fabulous. I don't know why I'm here.
Right.
And look, sometimes you can crack that nut and sometimes you can't. Like I have had somebody once where I had to ring the they sent to me by People and Culture. I had to ring the People and Culture manager after 3 sessions and say, look, I actually don't think I can help this person because they were lying about their feedback. Like the manager had given me, here's their last performance review where she'd been told all these things. And I said, so, tell me about the feedback you've had from your manager. And she said, oh, he told me I'm wonderful. We had this great chat the other day and he said, I'm doing really, really well. So I couldn't.
Not so, she says.
Couldn't help her because she wouldn't, couldn't crack that nut of I need help because people can't change unless they feel like they need to do it. But then you get people who, in that sort of situation, who sometimes what I have to do with them is talk about, impact and the results. So they'll say to me, look, I'm doing great, everything's fantastic. And, they'll say, but I didn't get a promotion. And I'll say, so let's unpack that. Let's talk about why you think you didn't get the promotion. Let's talk about strategies for how you could do differently next time. And quite often that's where the penny drops for them.
Right. Okay. So is a lot of it you having to not give the answers but show where the answers might lie in that type of, right, okay.
That's coaching. You can't tell people things. I mean, look, if I've got a young...
Would you like to?
Sometimes, yeah. If I've got a young manager who's really like no experience, has no idea, I'll give them some models or some theories or let's work through, some scenarios of how you could do this.
Right.
But when you're talking about people's self-awareness, it really is about just asking good questions till they figure it out themselves.
Right, if they figure it out themselves, which is not always apparent. And so if you were to look at, I know we haven't put this in the questions that I sent you earlier, but what would you change? Is there some way that people in Australia could get better at, like is the tall poppy syndrome or, you want to be a leader, that means you want to kind of take control of everything? Or is it more of a, how do we embed good leadership into our, schools and our higher ed system so that people, when they do go into management roles, because a good leader is great, but a bad leader is terrible. Has it frustrated you over time? Or what would, if we had a magic wand, how would you make leadership better in Australia? I know that's a huge kind of question, but.
I think there's a number of things to unpack here. One of them is that the people who tend to be really aspire to leadership quite often aspire to leadership for the wrong reasons. So you do get people who want to be a leader because they want to be in control or they like the status and the, I can tell everybody that I'm a leader and I've got this great business card I can give everybody. So those types of leaders are in it for the wrong reasons.
Right. So they're the ego leaders.
Ego leaders, and quite often, and one of the things about them is they're often very good at managing up. So the people above them think they're wonderful, but the people beneath them are looking at it and going, we have no idea why this person keeps getting promoted. It's a mystery to us, but nobody asks them for their opinion, which is, so there's lots of structural things we could do about that. I mean, in recruitment, we could actually ask the team what they think, and then there's the fact that we could be teaching kids in school a lot of this stuff.
Right.
And a few times we've, we've actually approached some schools down here and said, look, we think we could do some really great work for like your year 10 through year 12 students. Yeah. And the career counsellor people have always been really on board, but we've never been able to get it over the line because the principals always say, look, the parents won't be prepared to pay. And look, we've even offered for free. We've said, well, we'll do this for free. And the only thing you have to pay for is like the cost of diagnostics or workbooks or whatever. Still can't get it over the line, which is really disappointing because if we got kids in school to learn this sort of stuff, the workforces would be better.
And that goes to my next question. You've written a book called The Resilient Employee, The Essential Guide, I love this, to coping with change and thriving in today's workplace. And so that was written nearly 10 years ago. So A, how did you come about that? And B, what's changed in that decade since you wrote the book to today?
So how that came about was still do run a program called Thriving in Change, which was for people being impacted by changing workplaces.
Right.
And whenever I ran the program, I'd get really phenomenal feedback. People would email me afterwards to say that was incredible, it's really changed the way that I view change and so on. And so I started to think about how to get that out into the world in, I guess, a bigger way. And a book is really obvious because you can get that into the hands of a global audience. That was where that sort of started from.
Yeah.
And it's really based on the program. So it's quite easy to put together. It was just a matter of, putting all the program bits into a structure and then filling all the gaps that were there, more stories or more examples or whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of what's changed, it's quite disappointing that not much has. Like I'm still running that same program inside organisations and seeing exactly the same problems, and a lot of it
is Groundhog Day.
It is because change is usually dealt with in organisations on a very process level. Like, even when you've got a change manager, it'll generally be there's a change management strategy and a communication strategy and checklists for all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And the bit that's missing, which is the focus of the book, is about what happens to people in change, because most change efforts fail because the people don't change.
Yes.
And when people are upset about change and dig their heels in, it's very hard to move them. So it's all the book, and the focus of it is about, let's actually look at what people's experience of change, what happens to them, what they go through, and how do we actually as leaders do this better? How do we bring people along with the change rather than them fighting it the whole way? And sadly, like I said, not much has changed.
And is it still a process-driven approach? I mean, I've been in roles where the organisation's gone through redundancies, and unfortunately, I've been through too, and it's horrible. You get called in and do you want to go home? And like terribly unpleasant. I say to the kids occasionally, like this is the modern workforce. Like it's unpleasant, but it was always very much a checklist. Like it was HR doing it, and as horrible as it is. So let's go back to the book itself, and then we'll kind of deep dive into that point. Those really important points you made. Do you remember getting the book out of the box for the first time and going, wow, that's my name on it? And was there a sense of great achievement when you did that? Because it wouldn't have been a small undertaking. I think you said, I put it together, but you're still writing a book,
took a year,
and you're still going to go and sell the thing. So you've obviously got the program. Was it, I'm just going to go and do this now? And what was it like I've never written a book. What was it like to get out of the box and there it is, this thing you've created?
It's pretty surreal, to be honest. You sort of get, you get your proof copy. You get your proof copy and it's like, God, it's a real book. But obviously that's just the proof. And then you get a box that arrives and you open it up and it's like, that's my book. And we had a great launch. So Fuller's Bookshop here in Hobart hosted the launch, and they sort of, when they do book launches, invite a huge mailing list. So I had this huge crowd of people. I don't know how many people turned up, 50 or something. And it was
just the 21st. See, there's the 21st.
Yeah, no, it was my 21st. But it was a great experience. I mean, it was
good on you.
Just getting it into the hands of so many people, and it went to top 10 in Australia in Amazon. It was top 25 in the UK and top 50 in the US.
Great.
In the whole of business books market. It wasn't sort of niche down. That was just the general business books. So looking at Amazon,
like a bit of a thrill, seeing
looking at Amazon
on the top of the pop charts almost in business.
Amazon, and there's all these books by people like Brené Brown and, all those sort of people. And there's my book sitting in the middle of it. It was quite surreal. And look, it went really well in the UK because just timing-wise, accidentally, it coincided with all the announcements of Brexit.
Yeah.
So I think there were a lot of people in the UK kind of Googling what happens if I lose my job.
Right. And then up came your book from Hobart. And you still got it on sale?
Yeah, it's still for sale. Bookshops, Amazon, all the major book retailers. Right. And look, it still sells reasonably well. I mean, I get a couple of $100 a month of royalties, so it's still trickling along out there.
And we will put a link in the show notes to it. So how, going back to the points you were raising before, is there a way of then kind of deprocessifying, which is not a word, but I like to make words up, that horrible change experience? What would a perfect change experience look like for you? Let's just say you were running, it doesn't matter, energy company, Ros Energy, okay, we have to merge or demerge, whatever. What does a perfect change experience look like? What are the kind of 3 or 4 parts of that?
The big one is communication, because most organisations don't communicate particularly effectively.
Right.
And in a change, people need a lot more communication than you think they do. Even if you've got nothing to say, it's better to go out and say, there's been no change this week, rather than to just say nothing, because people immediately fill the gap with gossip. So that's what people do, as a sense-making species. We're out there trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So lots and lots of communication. Leadership visibility. Leaders need to be out and about talking to people. There needs to be a genuine consultation process rather than we're going to pretend we're consulting so we can tick a box and everybody knows that we're just ticking the box.
Yep.
When people are being impacted, early support is really important. So I've actually heard of an organisation that actually did this really well. I wasn't involved in it, but somebody told me the story. And they had to make a lot of people redundant. And what they did was they created a people and culture team that was dedicated to those redundancies. And what they did was they called up companies in their sector and said, we're about to make people redundant. We've got some really great people here. Is there any opportunity in your organisation? and then provided support with interview prep, resume writing, all that kind of thing, getting these people ready for jobs. And at the end of the process, I can't remember how many people were made redundant, but only one of them didn't get a job. And he said, look, I didn't get a job and that's, not great for me. But he said, I cannot fault the way the organisation handled this, the amount of support they provided to people.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't their fault,
No. That outplacement, that's rare to hear, I guess, to an extent of those is it outplacement? Is it?
Yeah. And look,
language?
Organisations often provide outplacement services, but it's quite often some of them can be very, very good, but quite often it's just a couple of sessions with a career counsellor, for example, just to sort of tidy up your resume and get you ready. But, really it's about, with people in organisational change, is the more they understand about it, the better it is for them, the less resistance you'll get. And the other thing is, then this is the critical thing, is that people don't resist change, they resist losing something. So if you can identify what people are going to lose early and compensate for that in some way. And I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I remember being involved in a change process where it was a change of a computer system. And there was a guy who was an expert in the credit process, and everyone went to him whenever they needed any help. So he was kind of like the credit person.
He was the guru.
And the new system came in and he bagged it out. He was incredibly critical and he ended up resigning and took this huge amount of organisational knowledge with him. But hindsight, you look at it and you go, he was losing his expert status. He was losing being a guru. So easy thing to do would be to get him involved early, make him a trainer, make him like the expert again, so that then he would retain that expert status.
Yeah, and have that energy and enthusiasm, which would have brought, what's that saying? Up to, being positive in that environment actually, really enforces the positives of the outcome that they're wanting to achieve. I hate to use the term influencer, but he would have been a great influencer in that environment. And the flip side to that is, why do organisations, with all the amount of work and people like you to support them, why do they get it wrong? And you keep coming back. I don't know how many times you've already said communication in the last 29 minutes, but is it communication? Is it managers not thinking? Is it boards not asking the right questions about what are we doing to support the staff if we have to do this?
It's usually thought about as an afterthought. So it's very rare that I get asked to go into an organisation and start running, say, Thriving in Change before a change. It's always an afterthought. It's like, we've been doing this change, things are going really badly wrong. Can you come in and give us some support now?
Right, yeah.
And look, there are organisations with internal change teams who are doing a really great job of this. So, I suppose I tend to see the more negative side of it because I'm called in to fix something.
Sure.
But it's usually as an afterthought. It's like, we've got this thing, it's amazing, we can't understand why everyone in the organisation hates it and won't use it. And can you come and figure that out? So it becomes it's their problem, not it's our problem.
Right. So it's the Band-Aid as opposed to the positive. Prevention is better than cure. Okay. When you're talking to, so that's the negatives, but when you're talking to high-performing teams, what are two or three, four themes that you see when you're actually looking at a high-performing team compared to a team that does need some help? Because I guess you see that every day, that individually with the folks that come through your door or the organisations you've gone through. So just let's do a bit of a column of what makes a great team in your experience, and then what are some of the challenges that you see before these things become a real crisis?
So in really high-performing teams, there's clarity around roles and goals. So everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and also what the goals of the team are. So they know where they're going and what their part in it is. And there's
why?
a real
part of
and why. Yeah, that sort of connection to the big picture. There's the connection and where they feel connected as a team. They've got each other's back. There's that sense of we support each other. And then there's a real learning culture. So those teams create psychological safety for themselves by having a sense of, when something goes wrong, we haven't failed, we're learning. So things get reframed as learning experiences. So then people feel okay with admitting mistakes and going, hey, look, I need some help with this. So you develop this sort of sense where people are, absolute clarity, real connection, and that sense of learning are probably the three big things.
Okay. And then so that's sort of the positives. What are some of the themes that you've seen over the years, either from your own personal experience of in public service or in private sector and now consulting, where you go, oh, hang on, we've got danger Will Robinson kind of stuff?
So where you get unclear direction. Like nobody really knows what it is they're supposed to be doing. There's always going to be work. Work will always arrive on your desk, but it's
Yeah.
people often say, I'm doing lots of work. I don't know if I'm doing the right work.
Right.
And too many goals or no goals at all is
Yep.
really common. Either there's, 50 goals or we really don't know what the goals are. And a dysfunctional culture where people don't trust each other. Trust is the real bedrock of performance. If you don't trust your teammates, you're not going to work effectively with them. You're not going to share information. You're going to always be cautious about things. And those teams tend to really spin their wheels because they're not moving forward because of this sense that we just don't trust each other enough to work together.
And how do you then build trust? That's a simple question, but a very difficult answer. How do you build trust? Does that come through the EQ, the culture, people wanting to admit mistakes as opposed to, trying to hide them? I mean, it's a very simple way of asking a very complex question, I guess, but I'm really fascinated to drill down on that because trust, if you don't trust your boss, you're not going to want to work for them, and that you're demotivated before you even turn on your emails.
And look, there's a little bit of a difference. Well, they're kind of similar, but a bit of a difference between trusting your manager and trusting the team.
Right.
So trusting in the manager is built around, I believe that you're competent and you make good decisions and you're taking us in the right direction.
Right.
And I believe that you care about me as a person.
Yep.
So when you make decisions, you're considering the human factor in it.
Yep.
When we talk about trust in teams, what often's missing there is the team don't really know each other.
Yep.
And that's one of the first things that I'll do with teams in building trust is do some activities around helping people get to know each other. So as an example, I might use a series of questions that people can choose a question and then answer it and talk. They split in pairs and talk to each other about it. And those questions will be things like, who was the person in my childhood who was the biggest influence on who I am today?
Yep.
What's an event when I was a kid that's really, framed me up? Or where did I live when I was a child? That kind of thing. When people start to talk about that, they discover all these things they've got in common.
Yep.
And they'll say, wow, I never knew that about you. And it's because they didn't get to know each other. You can't build trust with somebody unless you know a reasonable amount about them. Because if you think about people you trust at work, you generally know things like when their birthday is, how many kids they've got, what suburb they live in. You might not have ever been to their house, but you know enough about them. You know that they've got a dog and his name's Rover, And if you don't know that about your teammates, you can't trust them because you don't know enough.
That's true. Your answer to that is virtually word for word the same as a guy who I listened to on the Ed Leaders podcast. And I reference that podcast a lot because A, I love it, and B, they've got some cracking interviews. And a guy I knew in Canberra who ran one of the schools, Radford College, and his name was Dr. David Mulford. And David, in the podcast that I'm just referring to, talked about part of his role, and he's now retired, was knowing 5 things about every kid in his school. And it was more than name, year level. It was mum and dad's name, what mum and dad did, what their interests were, da-da-da. And so, and for the staff. So it meant when he turned up to stand at the sidelines of insert name of sporting match on a Saturday, he could say to mum and dad, "Oh, little Johnny's da-da-da," and it was and it wasn't put on. And I knew David relatively well in my time in Canberra, but I came away from that experience listening to that podcast going, "Wow!" And I actually did that test some years ago with a bigger team I had then, and they all looked at each other and went, "Oh, gee, we could name 3 or 4 things about it, but do we know 5 things about each other?" And that actually preceded a conversation about what is a lot of the conversation at work just quite not high level, but
transactional.
Transactional. That's a much better way of putting it. So then, how do you make the leader in that situation? And you referred to it before, actually care about the staff, because sometimes people use staff as almost the rungs to get up the ladder. And you said before, and I thought it was a really good point you raised, that some of these people with the egos are always looking to manage up, not manage down. How do you embed service leadership and that kind of positive culture into a leader who might just be not really interested in being open to that sort of type of approach?
And look, I'm going to tell my own personal story here because I was one of those leaders.
Oh.
Back when I started my career, I was very task focused. It wasn't something, people weren't really something that was a consideration to me other than almost like a means to an end.
Yep.
And I had a young lady working for me who very, very bravely one day said to me, "I can't do my best work for you because I feel like you don't care about me." And
wow.
I was horrified because I felt like I did care for her. I'm like, how could you say that? Of course I care about you. And she said,
Yeah.
you've never really asked me anything about my life outside of work. We come to work and we start talking about what we're doing this week, and you never really asked me about how my
Yeah.
weekend was.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was almost like this massive aha moment where I went, that's the piece I'm missing. That's the piece that's, I always had this sense that I could be doing something differently, but I didn't know exactly what it was. This was really early on.
Yeah.
And it was a massive wake-up call. And she was also brilliant for me because if I did ask her about her weekend and then I tuned out, she would always call me out on it. She'd say, Ros, you're not listening to me. And I'd be like, I'm so sorry. You're right. I zoned out. I'm not listening to you. And
Dog's
I'd
name
make
was
it.
Rover last weekend. It's still Rover this weekend.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have 3 kids, not 5.
Exactly.
I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah. And so she was brilliant. The fact that she was a young kid, I was, so I would be maybe mid-30s and she would have been about, 20.
Yeah.
And just the fact that she was brave enough to call it out.
Good on her.
And then for me, that was one of the, I suppose, the defining moments in my career, which really made me go, I need to be doing something differently here, and let's figure out what it is. And it's, and that was just my training. I mean, public service background, we never learnt that. Nobody ever sort of said it's important to care about people. It's like, I do care about you, but I just wasn't showing it in any way,
Wow. What, without breaking confidentiality, did she go into a management role with a eventually, or what happened to that lady that you were working with?
Yes, she did eventually. I mean, it's been, years and years and years now.
Yeah.
And look, we do stay connected on LinkedIn. It was a very long time ago, but she's in a management role now. But she was one of those people who just had the ability to, I guess, speak the truth to power, if you want to use a cliche phrase.
Yep, great. So, Ros, who's a leader that you admire, either someone you've worked with or someone you've, in public life that you look up to? And what is it about their leadership that's really stayed with you?
It was really early on in my career. So after I left the Public Service Board, I got a job in, I think it was Arts, Sport, Recreation and Tourism or something it was called, one of the acronym departments. And so I was brand new into what was called personnel. So, all the hiring, firing, paying people, that kind of thing. And I didn't know anything about it. And my manager just really took me under her wing. And she was not that much older than me. She would have been maybe 5 years older than me, but she was just so supportive and encouraging and encouraged me to learn. I could never get anything. I mean, when I got something wrong, the way that she handled it was brilliant. She'd always say, okay, look, we've stuffed it up. That's fine. We can sort that out. It was never, I was never made to feel stupid because I didn't know anything. And she shared everything. She had a book of shortcuts that she used to use when she photocopied all the pages out of that book and gave them to me to put into a folder. So she shared all of her knowledge really freely with me, and I learned so much working for her. It's one of those things that was interrupted by yet another departmental merger. We were merged with another acronym department to become an incredibly long acronym that nobody could ever remember. And I went off to, I can't remember which department after that, but because I had her really early on, I think that was, I think I expected I was going to have leadership like that all the time.
Yeah.
And I was really disappointed to find out that wasn't the case.
No, she was obviously a good one. And then, it's hard to, those expectations, oh, that's fantastic. Oh, I've got someone who's nowhere near as good as you. And that's a challenge. Talking about people who you've obviously looked at and gone, fantastic experience. What is it in any team? There's always people that I use the term advisedly toxic or plain rude. How do you, as a leader, don't be toxic and be plain rude? And does that come through EQ and listening to your team, as obviously you did? But then how do team leaders deal with those? There's always, what's that I would say? There's, the 20% of people you deal with are going to be challenging, and the 80% are always going to be easy. But it's the 80% you spend on the time of dealing with the 20%. So how do you deal with that toxic person or the rude person or the person who really just wants to be transactional?
It does need to be managed, and what we often see happen is leaders don't manage it. They kind of tend to say to the rest of the team, oh, that's just the way they are. They're never going to change. Just try and ignore them. Yeah. But it's the important thing to remember is it's the impact they have on people around them, because if you're working with a toxic person, you can never fully relax. You're always on your guard for whatever it is they're going to do. And that emotional energy that goes into focusing on that relationship means that there's less emotional energy to get on with your job. So it actually impacts the performance of the team. So for leaders that are concerned with the sort of transactional, that can be the big wake-up call. Your toxic person is holding your people back from being good at what they do because they're concerned about managing it. And it's always about impact, because people, if you're a toxic person yourself, and I mean, this was, again, going back to that story I told about that young lady who gave me feedback, is I didn't realize what impact I had, that she felt she couldn't do her best work. She felt she couldn't be her real self with me because she felt like I didn't care. And for a lot of people, when they get that kind of feedback for the first time, it will do what it did to me, which is like, I didn't know I was doing that. It was totally not what I intended. I felt really, really bad, and I fixed it.
Yeah.
So lots of people will do that. And I've had people who've said to me, I just got given this feedback that there's something that I do that I've been doing all my life that has been a problem. And if somebody had told me this 20 years ago, I could have fixed it back then. So a lot of people are grateful for the feedback, but there are going to be that small percentage who aren't. And that does need to be managed, because if you're impacting people around you, you're stopping them from being effective, and it needs to be dealt with. So it's a tricky one.
And what if you're that leader yourself?
Again, it's a really
I can
hard.
see you shaking your head going,
I know.
oh.
They often, again, need to have somebody brave sit down with them and go, you know what, this is not okay. I don't know if you realise this, but this is the impact. And look, I remember this years ago. There's somebody in the department I was working for who was just really, really rude. He'd say really odd things. Like, I remember he got reported to HR because he said to a pregnant lady she had a belly full of paws and claws.
Oh.
And he meant it as a joke, and she was really upset by it. And he was just a really great guy who occasionally said silly things, and he didn't realise that's the impact he was having. And again, going back to impact, when you raise that with somebody, quite often they're like, oh my God, I had no idea that, that would make somebody feel that way.
Have expectations throughout your career changed in what is acceptable and what's not? Obviously, there's the sexism and the misogyny, the inappropriate language. We see a lot of that, and it's fantastic. Like the standards of workplace behaviour have changed. But are there specific things that you've seen over time? You go, right, that's different to when I wrote the book compared to what it is now, or the Me Too movement, for example, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's lots of things have changed, and it is around those sorts of things. So, like bullying, for example. I mean, back years ago, people bullied people in the workplace all the time, and it was just, particularly in things like trade areas, it was completely acceptable for people to be absolutely vile to apprentices, for example. And we know now that kind of thing is something that you can't and you shouldn't do. So there's been a lot of shifts in terms of the types of behaviours that are expected at work.
Yeah.
And it's for a lot of people who've sort of grown up, maybe, baby boomers, early Gen X like myself, the shift has been so dramatic that for a lot of people, they're struggling to catch up. It's that sense of, all my life I've told really sexist jokes and no one's had a problem with it. And then all of a sudden I'm being told not to do it. So it's quite a societal shift, and also a cultural shift for organisations that, we're getting there, but we've got a bit of a way to go.
Right. And is part of that, again, understanding how different, I don't like using the term generations because I'm Gen X and I'm like, oh, okay. Mind you, my father's generation had a very different expectation of come to work and you'll start at 9, you'll finish at 5. And I've been blessed with a lot of board folk over the last 15 years that have been like, oh, well, you work the hours and if you need to go and get the kids, whatever. Do you see some of those more progressive, positive sense leadership traits coming through the generations that you work with, or is it more, some of the younger people are still very much transactional and you'll do it this way and it's my way?
We are seeing a shift, and I was actually talking about this yesterday, that with the generations coming into the workforce, the younger generations, they have very different expectations of what work is going to be for them.
Right.
They're not living to work, they're working to live. And so for a lot of them, they're not going to put up with poor behaviour. They're not going to put up with being bullied or being marginalised in a workplace. If the workplace doesn't suit them, they'll go somewhere else.
Right.
Because we do see them being quite mobile. And a lot of them, really younger generations, a lot of them are running side gigs, like they've got a YouTube channel or they're, doing something else on the side. So for them, it's like, I come to work, I do my job, going home to work on my side gig, or a passion project or whatever it is. They're doing something, they're volunteering, whatever.
Yeah.
But they're not wedded to work. They don't have this idea that you have to come to work and, toe the line in fear of getting sacked, because for them it's like, well, if it's not working, I'll just go somewhere else. So that's going to be a really interesting shift as those people move into leadership roles, as they, sort of mature through the workforce and become leaders. What's their leadership going to look like? So
they're not drinking the Kool-Aid. They're not actually buying the Kool-Aid to start with, for example.
Yeah, they just, don't like it, move on. And look, it's you see it a lot in startups now, that sort of very flexible work culture where do whatever, be whatever. And if it doesn't fit, you just go somewhere else, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see that, really coming through in leadership. And it's going to be really interesting to see because, particularly like my generation, we're sort of heading towards retirement now. And, we learnt from our parents. I mean, my dad was a public servant. It's that expectation. You finish school, start work in the public service, retire at 65, get benefits. And when I started work, all of that was disrupted by the whole, redundancy, downsizing, right-sizing, whatever. But even with all that happening to me in my early career, I think I still picked up that, almost like that value set from my parents around you're loyal, you work really hard, you do your best, you stick it out. Even when things aren't going well, you hang in there because, you're meant to do that.
Yeah.
And you only move if there's if you're going to be upwardly mobile is when you move. Whereas people these days move sideways or even down.
That's right. It's not a linear progression. It's like
No.
I've gone out to my school in the past and talked about careers and I've, whatever. It's not A to B to CEO, as I remind them sometimes. Can I change the subject briefly? In your article, Mindful Leadership and Attention, you wrote, and this is a bit of a long quote, but I really liked what you wrote there. I'm just going to read it out to you whether we can reflect upon it. You wrote, quote, mindful leadership and attention are essential to creating a thriving work environment. Leaders who focus their intellectual and emotional attention on the teams inspire trust, which you've talked about, innovation, and a collaborative spirit. The more mindful you are as a leader, the more likely your team will mirror that focus, bringing their best selves to the table, which I really thought that was a brilliant piece of reflection there. So in an age of multiple notifications and phone, or you might have a work phone or the phone's always on the, the work stuff's on the phone. So in an age of mindful notifications and demands, how does a leader or anyone take that and implement it? And how do you actually turn off from work? Because there's a lot of, no more notifications, or I'm just going to put the work phone there on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. How do you actually be a mindful person in an environment like that?
It's really about how we manage our attention and manage distractions, which sounds really, really obvious. But as you've alluded to, it's actually not that easy because there's always distractions going on. So when I'm working with leaders, there's a couple of really fundamental pieces we work on around this. The first one is focus time to get deep work done.
Yep.
And that's about blocking out your calendar and being really clear with people. Unless the building's on fire, please don't interrupt me because this is my morning for deep work. And it might only need to be one morning a week, but it's whatever it is. But it's like find that time to really do the important work. And then when you're with people, it's about giving them 100% of your attention, which means shut your laptop lid, put your phone away. One of the things about having a phone visible, even if it's face down and it never rings, is that people feel like you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
So you've actually got to put it in a drawer in your bag or whatever. Just clear the space, turn away from your computer, turn to the person and give them your 100% attention.
Have a conversation.
Have a conversation. Don't kind of go, I'm still typing, but I'm going to chat to you while I'm typing, because then people don't feel heard. We can't multitask. We like to think we're multitasking, but we're so rubbish at it. We've convinced ourselves we're great multitaskers. We're totally not.
One of the things, I don't have it on my email signature at work, but I like it, is I've worked with some people in other roles where they've had, I will email you at a time that's convenient to me. It might not be convenient to you, and I'll get back to you when I can, essentially. And it was basically setting that framework for them to say, it might be out of hours. I don't expect you to respond if it's out of hours. And that person also had a rule about, he checked his email 3 times a day when he came into work for an hour lunch and then late in the afternoon. And he said, if you want me all the time, you pick up the phone, you ring me. I thought, okay. Now, I don't necessarily do that because of the role that I have and it's a bit more responsive. But I thought, wow, and he was a CEO of a big organisation. And he was adamant that that was the way to extrapolate what you're saying. His view was, I will work my hours when I need to. I'll do it because he was doing long hours as a very senior person. But he was very disciplined in when he would check emails and when he would respond to emails. Is that a discipline to get into, or does it depend on the role? Or do you have people coming in these days going, well, I've got Slack and I've got Teams and I've got whatever. How does it all work?
It's about, you're right, it's about the role. So, for example, if you are a customer service agent, you can't go, I'm not going to answer the phone between these hours or whatever. You don't have that option. But for a lot of people, we have the option. We just don't use it. And it's about being really clear about our boundaries, not only with other people, but also with ourselves.
Yeah.
And you're right. If you've got that focus time set aside, so just say you've decided every Tuesday morning from 9 till 12, you're going to have deep work time. And that's when you're going to do all the important things. Turn your email off, put your phone on silent, whatever it is you need to do, clear the decks. You might spend half an hour before you start getting rid of all the little things so you stop worrying about it. And then you can do the deep work. But it's the discipline of doing it, because we're a very distractible species as well. We're wired to respond to urgency rather than what's important. So if something pops up, we go, oh, it feels urgent. It dinged, the ding noise of an email, it feels urgent. We have to stop everything and look. Whereas if you shut your email down, you're not getting that. So it's a discipline thing, really.
Does some of that observation that you're making there, and you use just the word species, come back to you, 8-year-old was wanting to be a vet, the kind of
Probably.
observational stuff. And you look at people sometimes and go, I do not know how you did that or why you did that.
Yeah. Quite often. Again, humans are fascinating because they're endlessly unpredictable. You sort of think you've got it figured out, and then all of a sudden somebody does something. You're like, yeah, that's not what I was expecting.
Fair enough. Your training suite, and we've talked a lot about emotional intelligence today, but your training suite places a lot of emphasis on emotional intelligence and something you also talked about, courageous conversation. So why do you believe that, I think you've kind of touched on it before, that emotional intelligence is undervalued in leadership? And what are some tips for an up-and-coming leader where they've actually got to have some difficult conversations? And then my second question, which I know I didn't send to you, is how much of the impact is AI having on leadership in different ways?
Well, we'll start with the emotional intelligence. It's an underpinning of authentic humanity, I guess, in a way, because emotional intelligence is that ability to understand myself, understand you, and bring my best self to the interaction that we're having. So it's, I might be feeling really angry with you, but it's that thing of strategic, is it appropriate for me to show that right now? It might be, but it might not be. So it's about choosing the behavior. Even though we're experiencing an emotion, we can choose the behavior that we use along with it. So EQ goes a long way in life. It's not about work necessarily. This is about life skills, that ability to manage self effectively. It's a very reflective thing too, about exploring, I'm feeling really angry about this. I wonder what's going on for me. Like, why is it triggering me so much?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sort of internal reflection around that. So it's a critical life skill. It really is. And, we should be teaching this. The reason we don't do it well is because we don't value it in Western society. We shut it down. We've been told for years, put your emotions aside, don't bring them to work. You shouldn't be emotional in the workplace. And there are other cultures that celebrate emotion. You go see other cultures when there's a funeral, people will wail, openly be wailing and beating their chests and ripping their clothes in grief, because for them, expression of grief is normal, whereas for us, it's not. So we spend so much of our time, trying to compartmentalize our emotion and not, it's like, I won't be angry. I can't be angry because I can't do that at work. Or, it's about the behavior, obviously. It's not displaying anger, but it's sitting down and saying to somebody, that really upset me. Can we talk about that? And we just don't do it.
And just reflecting back on your very good point about grief, there's more to the, dare I say, grief than having a cup of tea and a sandwich and then writing on the condolence book and then going to work, back to work the next day, for example, which is not to say that that's the wrong way. It's just,
just our way.
It's our way. And, wow.
There's the second part of the question.
The second part's the AI question, which I hadn't mentioned before, but it struck. I use AI. I will admit, I use ChatGPT every day for a whole range of reasons. One is like work stuff, whatever, but sometimes it's just a sense check stuff too. So has AI played an impact on, what you do to an extent? Has it allowed you to increase your own practice, for example, in terms of what the services you ask for? And are you finding more people are relying on AI as almost a crutch?
It's absolutely a great tool. I use it as well. I use it, every day. I've, trained my own GPTs to do various things for me. It's a huge productivity lifter for people who use it well, because it can shortcut all kinds of things. I use it to help me brainstorm. I'll, give it a whole, I use one on my phone, which I can talk to. So I'll just give it a stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness. I'm thinking about this,
back, but anyway.
And I get it to help me, craft that into something that's going to make sense to people. Or I run things past it and go, before I send this email, can you just double check the tone, that kind of thing. It's, in terms of leadership, it could be a and this is something I really want to start exploring in my own work, is using it as a leadership coach. So
Right.
it's that
Okay.
not necessarily to replace leadership coaching, but as a tool to use in between sessions, for example.
Yeah.
So if, say, for example, I've got a client that we're working with on having difficult conversations, and
Yeah.
they might, before going to have a difficult conversation, actually just sense check it with the AI. If you've got AI that's trained in the methodology. So that's the important thing, is training the AI and the methodology that you want people to use.
Right.
And I think it could be incredibly useful. So I started exploring that in my business around, as I said, I'm training GPTs. So it's working out the best usage of them and how to actually implement that, because I think it's going to be a fabulous tool going forward. It's just got to be used in the right way.
And is there a place for AI in the nuanced of someone comes to you, they sit down, they have a conversation, you can observe them, the verbal cues, the non-verbal cues. AI can't do that.
No.
So
And that's why it won't replace people, because it can't replace genuine connection, genuine empathy. It can't replace that sort of sense of, human imagination, all of those kinds of things. It's going to
yeah,
get close, but you're right. It's that being able to look at somebody. And that's one of the things about being the difference between a good coach and a great coach, for example, is a good
Okay.
coach will hear what you're saying and coach you around that. A great coach will be able to go, I hear what you're saying, but there's something in the, your body that's telling me that's not really what's going on here. Do you want to talk about that instead?
Okay. I'm sure throughout your career you've heard some great phrases, some leadership phrases, some of the worst. So let's just riff briefly, if we can, about some of the best and worst workplace phrases you've heard. And I say this with tongue in cheek. Any episode of Utopia, which you've seen,
Love that show.
fantastic. We might deep dive on that. Hollow Men, which was reliving my years in Canberra as a political advisor. I couldn't watch that for a while because I'm like, oh, hang on, it was very close. But are there some workplace, cliches that you hear sometimes? You go, oh, wow, that's just, the customer is never right. And I think that the initial quote was the customer is never wrong. And the initial quote was the customer is never wrong in terms of taste. So are there things that you just hear, cliches or, memes that you just go, oh, that's just really bad?
There's so many.
Right.
I think one of
What are
the
your top three worst, Ros?
Oh, my top one worst, I think,
Yes.
is the phrase, you've got to be on the bus or off the bus.
Oh, dear.
And why that's so bad is because it's used during change generally, and it's used with people who are resisting change, where it's
Right.
like, we're not going to put up with you resisting change. You're on the bus or off the bus. And when I was running one of my programs, Thriving in Change programs, some guy said to me, they're telling us we've got to get on the bus or off the bus. But he said, I feel like, honestly, I'm standing in a bus interchange.
Yeah.
And there's all these different buses, but there's no information on the front of them to say where they're going. And so I don't know which bus to get on because I don't know where they're going. And so that's why I'm not getting on the bus, because I don't know where the bus is going to go. And it was such a great metaphor for what he was feeling about not having any direction. They're asking us to make this change, but we don't know what the end outcome is going to be. So that one really stuck with me, just because it's so badly used. Got to get on the bus or off the bus.
Yeah. You need some
and
more
there's
trains in
others.
Hobart, and I'm being completely I don't know if you've got just being the smart ass. So yeah. But it's
They've
that
got no
kind of, either the
trains.
train or the train will run you over. It's like, okay, fine. Well, the tram
the bus.
it's
Get
a
on the
must.
bus or we're going to run you over on the way out the
Oh,
door.
dear.
It's just so damaging to people because it's so demanding. It's this sense
Yeah.
of you're taking away their choice from them. And it is a threat, on the bus or off the bus means you get on the bus or we're going to, get rid of you.
Yeah. Wow. What about one of your favourites? What's something that you would like to hear more of in terms of?
There's so many, and a lot of them get, I've got favourites that I used to use as favourites, and now they've become a meme,
Okay. Let's hear them.
And I find myself kind of going, I'm not going to use that phrase anymore because it used to be really awesome and it's not anymore, And you see that sort of workplace bingo where they have all those different phrases that you're supposed to tick off, and I look at that and go, God, I've used some of those ones.
Right.
One of those, which I love, which I'm starting to go, I can't use that anymore, is talking about, a journey, being on a journey, on your leadership journey, on your change journey.
Yep.
And I've loved it because it describes what we're doing, but it's become so overused now. I'm starting to cringe when I hear myself say it.
I hear I don't disagree with you, and I say this, you don't know me, but I have been known to watch a bit of reality TV, and every time there's always a backstory and the journey, the contestant on insert Australian Idol, whatever goes on, or the experience of, Farmer Wants a Wife. and journey. I'm like, oh wow, whatever Ros, the up and coming pop star, wants to do, her journey through life. It's just a
Mm.
cliche. Which is not to say that yours is a cliche, but
Oh, it is now. I'm feeling like I can't, because of that, I cringe every time I hear myself
Right.
say it, 'cause it pops out. Like, I'd be like,
Yeah.
something about the change journey. I'm like, God, don't say that. It's
Right.
it's so
So do you
cliche.
need, and I say this again with tongue firmly in cheek, and you can see the tongue in cheek here. Do you need to go onto ChatGPT and say, "This is the cliche that I'm using. Turn it around."
Great idea.
Turn it around. We're gonna keep going, and because I love some of those reflections, and I can't remember the character's name that Kitty Flanagan plays in Utopia. But do you ever come across those type of people, and the HR people culture person, and go, is it? Hey, which one's Kitty Flanagan? No, I'm trying to remember the character. I think Kitty Flanagan's. But the HR type person
Mm.
character in Utopia, and you go, oh, is it just too close sometimes?
Yes, sometimes, yeah.
Right, there you go.
You know,
When I wrap the show up, I will actually refer to the correct character and correct my incorrect naming of them. Um, and some of that sometimes just because of the culture of HR roles, and I still don't understand what people and culture means. I thought culture was something that, for example, leadership teams were actually meant to do entirely. Where does that come from? We've gone from personnel to HR to people and culture. I know that's a question I haven't sent you, but how do we get to people and culture, which is not a negative thing, but I'm just interested as a layperson, go, what's it going to, like, I don't understand how it's that, because I would have thought culture is something everyone owns.
mm. And look, I agree. And there was a bit of a move at one point to change it to people and performance, because
Ah,
culture is, you're right, it's owned by everybody. We all create culture. Culture is really the way we do things around here. And it's about the stories we tell each other, the beliefs we have in the organization about, how we do things.
yeah,
And everybody owns that, particularly the leadership, because culture is absolutely driven from the top. When I do diagnostic work, for example, and there's a one I use from a company called Human Synergistics, and we can do the individual leader and we can do the organizational culture. And usually the CEO and the organizational culture pictures are very, very similar. So it's absolutely driven by the top. But there is this sense that people and culture is, it's almost like, and it always has been, this idea that responsibility kind of gets shifted to the HR team. Sort of look at that for my whole career, really. It's been, if somebody's got a difficult conversation, they come and bring it to HR and almost want HR to do it for them. And so there's been a
right.
shift from that HR doing for the manager into the HR doing with the manager, into the HR being the support in the background while the manager does it. So there is that sort of learning journey. I said it again, the learning journey we're on.
I'm going to go through the transcript and see how many times you said, I'm kidding, you're kidding. Uh, but it's an interesting point. I mean, I've got no issue with in big companies, or in small companies, or in government departments, but it's just that language over time has changed. Maybe it's just the nature of organisations. Talking of organisations, your Unseen Barriers course, which I really enjoyed reading about, tackles unconscious bias in the workplace. So, what are some of the most common blind spots leaders face when it comes to inclusion, which is absolutely critical? And what are some practical steps that they can take to address them? There's stuff that probably you didn't even talk about when you joined the Public Service Board in whenever, 1980
Mm.
something.
It's one of the most interesting ones. It's the most common and it's the most difficult one to deal with, is the fact that we tend to surround ourselves with people who are like us.
Cells, yeah.
So you look at organisations, and if you've got a leader who's been in place for 5 or 6 years, everybody in the team will be like them because they've recruited people like them. Now, it's not a deliberate thing. What happens is if we get to choose between two people we're recruiting, we get two people who interview really well and they could both do the job equally as well, and
Yeah.
there's nothing much to split them. We'll take the person that we like, and the reason we like them is because they're like us.
Right. Which is not
So
necessarily the best way of going about doing the business.
no.
Right. Okay.
And so what happens is we end up with people who they think alike because they come from very similar backgrounds. And when I run my unconscious bias training, one of the activities I do with people is get them to list, maybe 5 or 10 people that they feel that they trust the most,
Yep.
and then tick a whole range of categories that they've got in common. So things around gender, disability, educational level, societal position, that kind of thing. And what people most often discover is that their top 10 trusted people are exactly like them. There might be 1 or 2 things that they haven't got in common, but everything else is in common. And that's because we're
Wow.
naturally, again, as a species, we collect in groups of people who we've got things in common with because they feel safer.
So
And that's what we do at work.
Yeah. So then how do you make sure as an organisation and as a leader in your own context that you are recognising that?
And it can be built into recruitment processes. So when I do unconscious bias for recruitment panels, for example, these are one of the things that we talk about is at the end of the recruitment, when you're sort of deciding who it is you want to pick, you do need to actually challenge yourselves on that. Like, why this candidate, not that candidate? Have we got a real reason, or is it just because we like this one better?
Yeah.
And it's really insidious because what happens is if we decided we like somebody and we don't like the other person, what we tend to do is they might say exactly the same thing, but we'll frame it, it'll feel different. So just say, for example, we have two candidates, one, and they both say, I love change, I love getting in there and mixing things up.
Right.
If we like the person, we're going to think, that sounds pretty good. I reckon we need some of that.
Yeah,
and if we don't like the person, we're going to say, I don't know that we're ready for that. That might be too tough an approach for this business.
Yeah,
so we're talking ourselves into it or out of it as we go.
Yeah. Is that where rapport in an interview situation comes into, like if you strike, I think most interviews either on either side of the table, depending on where I've sat, you can know in the first 5 minutes whether the person's going to go into the next round. Do you find that often with the work that you do with your clients?
Yeah, because that's, again, human. We make up our minds within about 7 seconds of meeting somebody, whether we like them or not, based on...
So why do we have to go through the process of doing our interviews? Or 3 rounds of interviews or whatever we have to do. I'm not complaining about it, but that's just the way it is. But it seemed to me a bit of a false construct sometimes, interviews.
Yeah, because it is. We've made up our minds about the person, right when we very first meet them. So there's a lot of value in things like blind shortlisting, where you remove all the identifying details and just purely go on the person's experience. So you don't know how old they are, what gender they are, what their name is, what cultural background. You just get their, their qualifications.
Yeah.
So blind shortlisting can be really helpful. It's just really tricky because that's maybe something that AI can help with in the future, is if we can program or teach an AI to eliminate those biases and just give us, the top 3 candidates to actually be interviewed by people. Maybe that will help. But it's a really tricky one because it's so built into us as humans, it's very, very hard to counteract it.
And so hopefully in processes like that, or with organisations being more aware of it, organisations, whatever size they are, will get to that stage where the right person is actually getting the job as opposed to the person that the panel likes the most. Is that a fair observation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we tend to justify it with talking about, fit in the team. We think this person's going to be a good fit in the team as opposed to someone who's not going to be a good fit,
What does fit mean? You're the expert.
We like them.
Fit mean?
Like
okay.
them.
Yeah. Okay. But it doesn't mean they could do the job better. It doesn't mean they're going to be able to be in the next role above in 2 or 3 years. Yeah. It just means I feel comfortable with them. They're probably, okay, right.
Yeah. And it's not even it's you hit it exactly. I feel comfortable with them.
Right.
I felt comfortable with you because of the colour of your skin. I didn't feel comfortable with that person because of the colour of their skin. But we don't articulate that to ourselves because we like to convince ourselves that we're actually very fair. And so we'll just go, I like that person better than I like the other person, because we don't explore it deeply enough to go, why was that? So
then I'm just reflecting back on your point about the blind CVs. How could organisations do that really well without, I can almost hear the pros and the cons, or ChatGPT spitting out the pros and the cons. How do you actually make sure those processes are as unbiased or as unconsciously biased as possible? Is it really actually going, we want to put processes in like you're talking about to make sure that we actually doesn't get to fit, it gets to experience and qualifications?
Look, there was a really great experiment done with one of the symphony orchestras. It might have been like the New York Symphony. I can't remember. I read about it a while ago. And they had predominantly men in the orchestra. Right. And they wanted to create more of a gender balance. And so what they did was they started, they tasked the people who were selecting new people to come into the orchestra with creating gender balance, and it didn't happen. They just kept recruiting more men than women. Yep. And then what they did was they actually had blind auditions like they do on The Voice. So the people listening couldn't see the person. They played behind a curtain. So that all they could go on was the person's musical ability.
Yep.
And miraculously, they started recruiting about 50% women, 50% men. It's a miracle. Amazing.
There you go.
Who knew?
So The Voice is not so much a reality. I mean, again, tongue in cheek, but The Voice isn't so much it's The Voice, isn't it? Where they hit the button and turn the chair around. Yeah.
Maybe that's where The Voice got the idea from. Who knows? But yeah.
Who knows? That's great. Do you see some of those reality TV shows? And I know my last interview I did with Andrew Klein in the last episode. He's an absolute Survivor fan. Do you look at some of those reality TV shows sometimes and go, oh, this is just really bad in terms of culture and whatever they're doing?
Yeah. Look, they're on Married at First Sight. I think the first season, the first couple of seasons, the consultants on that, one of the consultants was Dr. Tricia Stratford, who's
the late
she's
Dr.
passed
Tricia's,
away.
Yeah,
she's passed away now, but she did a lot of really, really great work on empathy and emotional connection. And I used to cite her work. I still do a lot of the time when I talk about those sorts of things.
Great. And
she left the show because it stopped moving. It moved away from being a genuine, let's find people who will be compatible, who can have a great life together, into let's get the people with the most drama and throw them in a room and get them drunk. So that's why she left. So a lot of the reality TV shows start off with a really great idea and a great concept, but it very quickly turns into the biggest entertainment value we can get.
Right.
Which I think is to the detriment of the show.
And I guess they're chasing ratings, or that's the drama and the how they put it into the 30-second ad. That's big. Appreciative of your time. Let's wind this up. So finish this sentence if you can. Now this is the hardest question I'm going to ask all day. Good leadership is ... You've had a little bit of time to think about this, Ros, so there's no pressure, but I'm going to probably use this in the promo. So good leadership is?
Good leadership is a balancing act. It really is. It's that balance of competing priorities. It's a balance of task versus people. It's a balance of everything. There's always a push-pull in leadership, and that's the balance is getting it right. That's what good leadership looks like. Enough attention, say, for example, on task versus the attention on people. There's the needing to move the business forward versus the need to maintain stability in the culture. There's always going to be that push-pull. So for me, that good leadership is always going to be about balance, getting it right.
Great. So let's go back to 21. I know that you've referred back to the year you were turning 21. So what would 21-year-old self say to you today? And then what would you say to your 21-year-old self? So you've got 21-year-old you with the baby on its way. What would you be saying to Ros of 2000 and what are we up to? 25?
Oh, goodness. I don't know what I would have said to myself back then. It was a sort of fairly messy time of life. I think I'd, look at probably saying, I hope I turn out okay and I hope my kids turn out okay,
Please let it be a healthy baby.
Let it be okay.
Yeah, no, it's great.
And look, looking back the other way, I'd say to that, 21-year or to any 21-year-old these days, it's really about, find something that you love doing, find it as early as you can, do it well and just enjoy life. And the other thing is life is not all about work.
I love it. So you're going to finish off early today? We're doing this on a Friday morning. I've got the day off. If anyone's asking, I've got the day off, so I'm not Skyping.
Sorry, I missed that. You've got very quiet.
I was going to say you're going to finish off early today.
I am actually. I've got another podcast interview this afternoon, but my Fridays are usually, I'm a grandma now, so Friday's a kids' night where my daughter and her husband bring the 2-year-old grandbabies over and we generally have pizza and play with the kids and it's good fun.
Right. No work. No. How does it work for you very quickly? I know we're going to wrap up now, but do you have the work phone and the Ros phone or is it all the one and the same? And how do you kind of de-notificationize? Another non-word anyway. I'm racking them up today.
Look, I've trained my clients. That's one of those things that when we start working together, I'm always really clear that, I work during normal working hours. If they've got something really incredibly urgent, I might call them while I'm driving home, for example, and have a chat while I'm in the car. But I set a real clear expectation that I'm just not available after hours and on weekends. And I don't work Thursdays now. So Thursdays I have the grandkids. So I do Grandma Day on Thursdays, which is fun. Love it. And again, it's about boundaries with clients and just being really clear.
And the client can either accept those boundaries or go, no, that's not the right. I hate to use the word fit.
No one's ever had a problem with it.
No. No, fantastic. Ros, thank you. That was almost getting like a masterclass out of all your the highlights of your deep experience. You've come a long way from I can imagine, rocking out to the CIT hall back in the days in Canberra and in Constitution Avenue, wherever it was, and having to do the public service exam, as I did here in Melbourne in the Royal Exhibition Halls and halfway through Year 12 because Dad thought it'd be a good idea. And I lasted about 6 years in the public service. Your journey, I hate to use the word journey because but
now we've said it, we can't.
It's just going to be in my mind all day. But that experience, and I'm not going to use the word experience. I'll find another synonym anyway. But that adventure you've had, there you go, throughout the leadership and being able to reflect back on particularly that story where your colleague in her early 20s took you aside and said, you're not making me the best person that I can be. I guess that would have taken a long walk around the block to kind of go, oh, wow, hang on, we need to. I had the same experience early on in my management career. I went, oh, I've just got to go and learn how to work with people. And it's a completely different response. But the fact that you've taken that lesson and then been able to work with people along the way is fantastic. So thank you so much for your time. I hope that, what's the pizza tonight? Are we pro pineapple on the pizza? Let's get all controversial here. What kind of pizza is it tonight?
The 2-year-olds love their pineapple on the pizza. So not only is it Hawaiian pizza with pineapple, but an extra can of pineapple gets open to put over the top when we get it. And they just pick the pineapple off and eat that.
What the driver's spoken, the 2-year-old. I love it. Hey, Ros, thank you so much for joining us on Dear 20-Year-Old Me. I do appreciate it. And we'll put all those show notes, folks, about Ros's books and also me making sure I get the character out of Utopia and HR right. Thank you so much for joining us on Dear 21-Year-Old Me.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, that was really good with Ros. I really enjoyed her insights, and particularly to see how leadership and the core skills about leadership in some ways haven't changed over time, particularly since, for example, she wrote that book, and we'll put the links in the show notes there. But then how leadership is going to change, and one of the things that we were talking about in regards to AI is just how much, for example, her profession, her people that do what Ros does, which is that leadership and critical skills training is going to change. You can talk to, your chat GPT every day and it will provide advice, but how do you then have that nuance and understanding and reflection back with the nonverbal cues? Lots there to unpack. A fascinating career. I love the fact that Ros basically used that 6 months as her public service time concluded to really ease into the next stage of her career, and also some of those, obviously inherently sensible things. Turn up to work, do your best, and I will go away definitely and think about that unconscious bias perspectives and how do you make sure that you aren't using fit as an example as an excuse to just hire someone like yourself. So some things to go away there and reflect upon in our own practice, in our own leadership roles, and also understanding where people like Ros who are in that, that nexus of the coaching and leadership skills, and she must see some really great examples, as she said, of great leaders, but also teams that could potentially do with some reiteration of the positive benefits of positive leadership. And I think we all know what good leadership is, but equally we all know what bad leadership is. So thank you to Ros for taking so much of her time out of her day. Really appreciate it. And you can follow Ros on all the links that we put in the show notes as well. And as always, thanks to Kirsty Kids and the Pooch for their support behind the scenes. And wherever you are around the world, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear 21-Year-Old Me. Until next time, go well, stay well, and bye for now.
Thanks for joining us today. For more episodes and links, visit dear21yearoldme.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts.